So we've been talking the last couple of months since the beginning of the year about the nature of mind, looking at awareness directly, looking at mind directly. The last class or two I brought up or used the words unconditioned or the unborn. And I think it probably causes confusion with people. Anybody who doesn't know what the unborn is, put up your hand. Good. We have some honest people. So there's a couple of things. In Buddhist thought, but not just in Buddhist thought, in Hindu thought as well. And if I probably knew the other religions, I'm sure it's there as well. But there's this idea of the conditioned and the unconditioned. The unconditioned sometimes is called God or universal presence. So there's this idea of the conditioned, which is our normal experience of life, which is the normal content of our mind, our thinking mind, where we have a self, we have a world around us, there is us, and then there's the world outside. And just all of the typical things we agree on in terms of what reality is. That's the conditioned. It's also sometimes just called I'm forgetting the name now. It'll come to me. But it's not the absolute. And so the opposite is the idea of the absolute reality. The opposite is of the conditioned is the unconditioned. The opposite of the known is the unknown. So the opposite of the born, of our experience, is the unborn. And so all of this is pointing to an underlying reality that lies outside of the conditioned mind. It's a reality, it's an experience that thought can't reach. So we work with these ideas, but these ideas of the conditioned and the unconditioned, when I use a word like the unborn, it brings us to a place. It brings us to a place, working with the idea, working with the concept, it brings us to this place. But at some point, we just need to let go of all idea and all concept. So the unborn, when I was using the word last week, unborn, or when I use the word unconditioned, I'm talking about coming to the gateway, coming to the door that's at the edge of experience, that's at the edge of the known. And this is an experience that meditators have. You start to get a glimpse of it. But also, I think it's an important thing after a few years of practice to really have an idea of this idea. And we know already that experience, whatever our experience is, that it's impermanent, that it comes and goes. Even though we have the sense of self, we have this sense of the relative, that was the word I was looking to, this relative truth, there is something that lies outside of that. So when those terms are used, they're pointing us in that direction. So when we move into that place that's very, very quiet, when we move into that stillness, it's not to fall asleep. At that point, that's where it's really important to be very, very wakeful in our practice. And listen very, very carefully. There's not a place that we reach. It's like, okay, I've reached this place. If you want to get calm, if you want to get concentrated, you can reach those places. But we're not satisfied with that. We come to a point of great stillness. And within that, we look very, very carefully. So when we use a word like the unborn or the unconditioned, what it does is it stops the mind. It stops the thinking mind. It stops the thinking mind. So when I use those words, I'm trying to bring us to that point. Rumi, a Sufi poet who you probably most of you know, wrote or said, live in the nowhere that you come from, even though you have an address here. And that kind of says it. So when we start to work with this idea of the unconditioned, when we start to have experiences of that stillness and that sense of something that's beyond the conditioned mind, something that lies beyond thought, we start to have a sense of that nowhere. And at some point, we realize that that's where we're from. The word they use in Vajrayana is groundless. Sometimes we use the word emptiness. Sometimes we say the mind is empty. Sometimes we say the mind is like sky. But the word groundlessness really kind of, the flavor that I'm talking about this evening is a good word for that. So there's a point where we get very, very quiet. And there's this underlying sense of a presence. But when we look, there's a groundlessness to it. There's a no-thingness to it. So we have that point. We have that intimation. Maybe we have that experience. And we really use that to inform us as we move through our day. As what it does is it cuts away at our attachment to self. It cuts away at our attachment to ego, because we now know, we now sense, we've now touched that there's something else underlying that's wide open, groundless, nowhere, perhaps. There's another, there's somebody said, I think it was a Tibetan monk, he said, it's not that you're not real. We all think we're real, and that's not wrong. But you think you're really real. You have an exaggerated sense of yourself. So this experience we have of self, this experience we have of being somebody, this experience that we have of the world, we can't say that it's not real and that there's just this nowhere, there's just this groundlessness, there's just this emptiness. In some way in this teaching, we hold these two opposite ideas. These two opposite truths at the same time. Of course you're real. Of course all of this is real. To a certain degree. But we exaggerate it. We think we're the solid entity. We take everything so seriously. And when we really look, we can't find anything of substance. So this is, when we get into these ideas, this is where it can become difficult. But what that Tibetan monk said is really, it's not that you're not real. It's not that we're not real. We all think we're real. That's not wrong. But we think we're really real. We exaggerate it. It's okay to be you. It's okay to be me. It's okay. And all of the things. But when we step outside conditioned thought, when we step outside conditioning and come to that point of acute, quiet observation, we realize that this address we have is not who we are. This body that you have, this conditioning that you have, is not who you are. It's where the mailman puts all the letters in. All the thoughts, all the emotions. Here's a big package for you. Drops it on your lap. It's all landing. It's all landing at this address, isn't it? It's all landing here. And it's not wrong that you have an address, that you have a self. It's not wrong. So when the Buddha talked, he talked about the two extreme of views. And to think you're somebody is one, and to think you're nobody at all is the other extreme. And the truth lies somewhere in between the two. So I hope I haven't confused you too much with this. But contemplate it. Think about it. There's a great freedom in being okay with who we are. And there's a greater freedom with knowing who we really are, or what it is we really are. And if this stretches your mind, it's meant to. The relative. Thank you, Chris. Somehow that wasn't coming up. So we learn to take our experience a little more lightly. We learn to allow the experience to come and the experience to go. And we start to have a sense of what's beyond that, what's underneath that. And the unconditioned is maybe an easier word to understand than the unborn. This is why the meditation is so important, and spending time in quietness is so important. Because if we hear these words, if we contemplate these words, if we allow these words to penetrate our heart, then the heart knows the truth of this. The heart knows. So the study of Dharma is exposing ourselves to these truths. And the practice is, when they talk about enlightenment, the word they use, or one of the words they use, is realization. Because we realize what's here, what this experience is, and at its most fundamental level. It's not attaining, it's realization, it's realizing. So there's that. The other thing is, I'm going to change topics here. Is we've been doing a lot of classes together. I've done a lot of guided meditations. And I think it can be easy for people to get confused. And maybe that's on me. I do different meditations at different times. But the process is this. We work with the breath, or we work with an object. Some people don't use the breath. Some people use a word. Some people use an image. But basically, we are putting our attention on an object. We quiet the mind down. We achieve samatha. We achieve quiescence. And then we look directly at the experience of mind. We train ourselves not to follow thought, not to follow emotion. And we look directly at this thing that we call awareness, as we call it mind. So whatever meditation we do, we develop the quiescence. We develop a quality of mind that is not being pulled away by thought, by emotion, by the past, by ideas of the future. We settle into that. Within that, so there's that movement, right? From busyness or non-meditation to this sense of quiescence. And then one of the things that I like to do, but we don't have to do it, you don't have to do it, is then to bring that sense of quiescence, to bring that sense of calm into the entirety of the body, and open up the awareness if we're working with breath. But you can do it with light, you can do it with an image, to open up that experience so it includes the entirety of the body. So if it's calm, using the breath, we open up that experience to the entirety of the body, to develop, to open, to deepen the calm. Sometimes we do visualizations in that we visualize the entirety of the body being space, like wide open space, or we visualize the entirety of the body perhaps being white light, or we visualize the entirety of the body being empty, like dark space. And these meditations on space, they help transition the mind, help transition our experience. So then when we look at the mind, we have already that sense of openness and spaciousness. So when we do these meditations, at the end of the meditation, spend a moment or two and contemplate it, and contemplate what your experience was. And what you'll find, and on different days it may be different, but what you'll find is there's meditations that will speak to you, that you have easier access to, perhaps. You don't have to do everything in every meditation, but basically we develop quiescence, quietness, and then with a attentive, quiet mind, we look at the mind, we look at awareness. We look directly at our experience. When we look directly at our experience, we often use the word undistracted. So we're looking at our experience, not distracted by thought, not distracted by idea. And we explore that very, very deeply. And when we get to know that, just as when we start to have a sense of the unconditioned, that which is beyond thought, then we contemplate that, we work with that during the day. we put that up against our experience in the moment. And we begin to have a sense of what Rumi said. Living in the nowhere, living in that openness. Even though we have an address here. Even though all these experiences and reactions are taking place, we are able to bring in that deeper experience, even if it's just thinking about it or contemplating it. We begin to see that in relationship to our relative reality. We begin to have a sense of the non-conditioned, the unconditioned, the unborn. We begin to have a sense of that. In the middle of our busy, busy life. It's not that we're not real. We just have an exaggerated sense of ourselves. And it starts to feel like that. We're not saying you're nothing. We know we have an address here. What's your address? Is your body, your conditioning, your personal history. All of that. That did happen. Except in this movie I watched the other night. But there's something else. And through the meditation practice and through the contemplation, we're opening up to that nowhere. We're opening up, let's call it the undefined. We're simply opening up to that.